Do you think the market is too optimistic, like the one vaccine can change the whole thing?
Psychologically is very, very positive.
Are you going to take the vaccine?
I would prefer to avoid the vaccines.
Where do you see the opportunities?
Emerging markets, particularly in Asia, are going to do better than the US market.
What else Chinese stocks or assets you favor these days?
We're more interested in the infrastructure. Do you use Microsoft?
I use Apple.
China, I believe, will develop another operating system. This will be very good for the consuming public.
How do you think emerging markets will come out of this crisis?
Many companies that rushed into producing masks, gloves, as we come out of this, you're going to find many bankrupt companies.
All right, Mark, thank you very much for taking time to do the interview with us. So first question, you had given interviews and reiterated that Biden is bad for equities, good for others. Do you still hold on to it?
Yes, I believe that if, by the way, the big if, they are implemented. You must remember, what did the Biden campaign say? They said that they wanted to raise taxes, particularly for the wealthy, and they wanted to raise taxes for corporations. If implemented, that's very bad for the stock market, as you can imagine, because rich people would want to get out and move into other areas. But what is complicating the factors is that they may not be able to raise taxes because the Republicans still hold the Senate. And in fact, the Republicans have gotten stronger in the House. So it may be not possible for Biden to implement these measures. But you also must remember, next year, we will see a very, very V-shaped recovery in markets around the world for a number of reasons. One is that a vaccine has been developed. Two, there have been treatments for COVID that have been successful, and you'll find more and more of these treatments available. And three, people will not stand for the continued lockdowns. You already see in New York, as you mentioned, people are not obeying the lockdowns. So by next year, people will be so fed up that they will disobey their governments.
Let's take energy stocks, for example. The energy stocks more than like 17% increase just because of the Pfizer news on vaccine. Do you think the market is too optimistic, like the one vaccine can change the whole thing, that just terminate this COVID?
No, I think it's all a matter of psychology. That news alone changes sentiment. People then see, oh, there's a chance to end this lockdown and all the other problems associated with lockdowns. It doesn't mean that everyone is going to be vaccinated. That's not necessary. But the mere fact that you have this vaccine psychologically is very, very positive.
Are you going to take the vaccine once it's out?
I'm not sure about the vaccine. I'm afraid there may be side effects from vaccines. So if I can avoid it, I would prefer to avoid the vaccines.
Right now, where do you see the opportunities?
Right now, the biggest holdings in our portfolio are India, China, Korea. Those are the big ones. Emerging markets, particularly in Asia, are going to do better than the US market because the US dollar is getting weaker vis-a-vis the currencies in those countries.
What do you like in the emerging markets?
Right now, I believe the opportunities are in small and medium-sized companies that are adopting technology to make their businesses more efficient and more productive.
You mentioned Alibaba and Tencent multiple times in previous interviews. What else Chinese stocks or assets you favor these days?
Well, I can't give you any names because we may be investing in them, but I will say this. We're more interested in the infrastructure. In other words, as you know, with the growth of the internet, and particularly now as a result of COVID, the demand for cloud services and for telecommunications linking people around the world like we are just now with Zoom, these all require more infrastructure, semiconductors, and all kinds of equipment that will facilitate this increase in traffic. So that's what we're concentrating on. We're concentrating on companies that produce the semiconductors and also the software and design for semiconductors.
How about the trade tensions? The trade tensions around the country, not only U.S., China, since President Trump took the office, changed your investment behavior, or if it changed?
It really hasn't changed much because we see that the trade tensions, and particularly the ones between the U.S. and China, has not really had any impact to any great degree. If you look at the trade surplus for China, it's actually gotten bigger, not smaller. The international trade is actually going on and will continue because people are connected. So I don't see any big change. And now, of course, with Biden, of course, he's interested in a global economy, global peace and friendship and so forth and so on. So I think there will be no interruption in global trade.
Does it mean that those trade-sensitive stocks may be worth investing?
Of course, those countries like China welcoming some of the big multinationals in the United States, these companies will, of course, push for better relations with China. And of course, they have quite a lot of influence, as you know, in Washington. So there's a good chance that this will also help the situation.
You mentioned that like internet infrastructures are worth investing. How do you think this technology policy under Biden's administration will be changed or not, and how this will impact your investment?
I don't think there's very much he can do on the technology side other than encourage antitrust action against some of the big tech companies in the US. But as you know, the big tech companies have quite a lot of influence in Washington. So there'll be a limit to how far they can go in that regard. One of the interesting and probably most beneficial aspects of the trade tension on the technology side is that now China sees the necessity for adopting a program to develop their own software and their own hardware rather than depending on the US. For the world, this is quite positive because it gives alternatives for people around the world. For example, I don't know, do you use Microsoft?
I use Apple.
Anyway, globally, Apple and Microsoft dominate the operating systems of personal computers. China, I believe, will develop another operating system which can be adopted by people around the globe. This is going to be very positive for those of us who are very frustrated by Microsoft and even Apple. So as the developed programs come out of China, this will be very good for the consuming public around the world.
What is your smartest decision in this COVID era?
The smartest investment was to go into semiconductor equipment.
And what you should have not done?
The dumbest one, or let's say the one we made the big mistakes on, were those involved in natural resources. Well, because the demand for these commodities went down, number one. And number two, there's a growing realization that ESG standards must be adhered to, environmental governance and social standards. Many of the mining companies have some real problems on the environmental side. So that turned out not to be very good.
How do you think emerging market will come out of this crisis? What will be the legacy of the COVID?
Well, of course, there are many companies that rushed into producing masks, gloves, rubber gloves. Of course, the rubber glove industry based in Malaysia is doing very, very well. But as we come out of this, you're going to find many bankrupt companies who rushed into this business and find themselves with a lot of stock in the warehouse that they can't sell. Of course, the companies that are able to develop a successful vaccine and are getting orders of millions of doses from countries around the world will do fine. But even in that case, there will be oversupply, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much for taking time to do the interview with us.